The United States have a population of about 333 million inhabitants, which makes them the third most populated country in the world, behind India and China. However, the population of the USA is distributed very unevenly across the national territory. Although the state of Alaska is the largest in the country in terms of area, around 17% of the land area of the USA, only 0.2% of the total population lives here. The state of Hawaii has about 1.4 million residents, or 0.4% of the total population. The overwhelming majority of Americans thus live in the 48 contiguous states. The northeastern US and parts of the West Coast are particularly densely populated. In general, the East is more densely populated, while much of the western half of the US is sparsely populated. This is partly due to the climate and the nature of the regions, and partly due to the history of settlement in the country. More on that in a moment. The most important metropolitan areas are New York, with about 20 million inhabitants, Los Angeles, with about 13 million people, and Chicago, with about 9 million inhabitants in the metropolitan region. These are followed by Dallas, Houston, Washington, Miami, Philadelphia, Atlanta, Boston, Phoenix, and San Francisco. Particularly noteworthy is the megalopolis known as Boswash, which stretches 750 kilometers from Boston through New York and other cities to Washington, and encompasses a total of around 45 million people. Thus, about 15% of the American population lives in this mega region. The most populous states are California, with a good 39 million inhabitants, Texas, with 30 million, Florida, with 22 million, and the state of New York, with around 19 million inhabitants. The United States is considered a classic example of an immigration country. The first European settlers came from the British Isles in the 17th century and settled on the East Coast. At the same time, from the second half of the 17th century, African slaves were increasingly settled in the south of what is now the National Territory. After independence from Great Britain and in the 19th century, the population of the young state grew rapidly. Immigrants from other European countries such as Germany, Italy, Central and Eastern Europe, and Scandinavia increasingly arrived. From the 13 original states, a population movement westward began. The indigenous population, which consisted of numerous different Indian tribes, was increasingly displaced in the process. They were often forced to leave their ancestral homelands and live on reservations. In the 1960s, the US greatly liberalized its immigration policy. Since then, immigrants have come primarily from Latin America and other regions of the world. Today, the US population is therefore very heterogeneous. According to a 2019 estimate, 60.4% of Americans are white with a declining trend. 18.3% are Hispanic or Latino. 13.4% of the population is African American, 5.9% is Asian, and the rest is considered multi-ethnic or Native American. However, the various ethnic groups are distributed very differently from region to region. White Americans make up a large portion of the population, particularly in the northern Midwest and some states in the East. Hispanic populations live primarily, but not exclusively, in the Southwest and Florida. African Americans are disproportionately represented, especially in the southern states. About half of the African American population lives here. Asian Americans live primarily on the West Coast, particularly in California and in Hawaii. Alaska, New Mexico, and South Dakota have the highest proportion of Native Americans, at around 10% of the respective total populations. English is the most spoken language at home for 78.2% of Americans. The second most important language is Spanish. It is the most commonly spoken language at home among 13.4% of residents. Spanish is especially spoken in the Southwest and South Florida. In cities such as Los Angeles and Miami, Spanish is the most commonly spoken native language. The growing number of Spanish speakers in the US is now estimated at more than 50 million people, more than the population of Spain. A large part of the population professes Christianity. For example, 48.9% of Americans are Protestant, including Baptists, who are especially dominant in the southern states, and Lutherans in parts of the Midwest, and 23% are Catholics, especially in the Southwest and Northeast. People with no religious affiliation make up 18.2% of the total population. Mormons make up less than 2% of the population. They are particularly present in the state of Utah, and the main center of the denomination is Salt Lake City. Jews make up about 2% of the population. The most important Jewish center is New York, where about 1.6 million Jews live. This is all about the United States for today. The third part of this series will focus on the country's economy. Thanks for watching, and until next time.